The first time I drove up that narrow, winding mountain road, I felt a strange mix of nostalgia and defiance, like the forest itself was watching me return, home after too long. The fog rolled low, hugging the pines, and the crunch of my tires on gravel echoed like footsteps from the past. I wasn't there to vacation. I was there to reclaim something that had belonged to my family for generations, a cabin my grandfather had built with his own hands in 1954. But the moment I parked and stepped out, I heard a voice slice through the silence. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing here?" She came striding out from the porch of the neighboring cabin, arms crossed, sunglasses perched high on her nose, phone in hand like a badge of authority, short blonde hair, bright pink tracksuit, and that unmistakable tone that made my blood pressure rise instantly. "Yep, Cabin Karen." "I'm just unloading," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She tilted her head, squinting. "This is private property. These cabins belong to local residents. You can't just show up here." I gestured toward my cabin, the one with the red shutters and the crooked chimney. "That's my family's place. Been in our name for 70 years. Her laugh was sharp and disbelieving. "Oh, please. Locals here don't just sell to strangers. You must be confused." It wasn't confusion. I had the deed in my glove compartment, and a lifetime of stories from my grandfather about summers spent fishing, chopping wood, and chasing fireflies under this very canopy. But standing there, watching her stare me down like I'd trespassed on sacred ground, I realized something deeper. This wasn't about property. It was about belonging. Still, I smiled and said, "Maybe you should talk to the town records before you start accusing people." She sniffed, unimpressed. "I'll do that," she said sharply, already typing into her phone. "People like you always say things like that." I didn't even know what she meant by people like me, but the tension in her tone told me plenty. As she stormed off, the wind picked up through the trees, carrying faint whispers, like echoes of my grandfather's laughter. I looked at the cabin and felt something stir. This wasn't going to be a weekend getaway. It was going to be a battle for respect and history. Because if Karen thought I didn't belong, she was about to learn whose land she'd been standing on all along. The next morning, I woke to the sound of someone hammering next door. It wasn't just ordinary hammering, it was aggressive, angry, as if each strike said, "You don't belong here." Cabin Karen was out in full force, pretending to fix her porch railing while keeping one eye locked on me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped outside. The air smelled like pine needles and morning dew. Pure nostalgia. I half expected to see my grandfather's old rocking chair creaking on the porch, but the place had aged. Moss climbed the sides, the shutters leaned slightly, and yet it still felt like home. "Morning," I called out. Karen didn't look up. "You're still here, huh?" she muttered. "Didn't think you'd last the night once the forest noises started." "Guess I'm tougher than I look," I said, sipping my coffee. She snorted. "You know, I checked with a few locals. No one remembers anyone named you owning this cabin. So unless you've got proof, I'd start packing." That's when something in me snapped. Not with anger, but with pride. I went inside, grabbed the old family photo that hung by the fireplace, and walked it over to her. "Recognize this?" I asked, pointing at the smiling man with a hammer in his hand and a young boy on his shoulders. Her eyes narrowed. "Who's that supposed to be?" "My grandfather, Edward Holloway. He built this cabin back when these woods were first opened for settlement. The Holloway family has been here long before the HOA, before the resorts, before all this." I gestured around at her modernized porch, her Bluetooth speaker, her solar panels glinting in the sun. Karen's lips tightened. Never heard of him. Of course she hadn't. People like her didn't care about history. They cared about control. But what she didn't know was that the locals did remember. That evening, I drove into town. A small cluster of weathered buildings, a diner, and a general store that looked like it. Hadn't changed since the 60s. Inside, I was greeted by an old man with a white beard and eyes sharp as an eagle's. "Well, I'll be damned," he said the moment he saw me. "You're Eddie's grandson, aren't you?" I froze. You knew my grandfather? Son, everybody knew your grandfather. He was the first to settle these woods. You've got his eyes. Something warm flickered in my chest. A connection. A confirmation that I wasn't crazy. But before I could say anything more, the old man leaned in and whispered, "You be careful, son. Some folks around here don't like the idea of the Holloways coming back." The old man's words echoed in my mind as I drove back up the mountain road that night. The forest, once familiar, now felt alive, watchful. The headlights carved narrow tunnels of light through the mist, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the mountain itself was whispering secrets I wasn't supposed to hear. When I reached the cabin, Karen's porch light was on. She was sitting in a lawn chair with her phone in hand, pretending not to watch me. The moment I stepped out, she called out, "The sheriff was here earlier. Said someone was poking around asking about old deeds. That wouldn't be you, would it?" I smiled faintly. "Just confirming what's already mine." She scoffed. "Sure. People come and go, claiming things that don't belong to them. You'll be gone soon enough." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to my porch, unlocked the door, and stepped into the cabin that smelled like cedar, dust, and memory. I ran my hand along the mantel, and that's when I found it. A small brass box tucked beneath a loose board. Inside was a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. It was a handwritten letter, dated 1978, my grandfather's handwriting. "To whoever returns, remember, this cabin was not just built with wood and nails. It was built with names, stories, and bloodlines. Holloways don't buy land, they build it. If you find this, then the mountain has called you back for a reason." My throat tightened as I read the final line. "And if anyone says you don't belong, remind them whose hands shaped this ground." The next morning, I drove back to the diner. The old man was there again, sitting in his usual booth. "I found something," I said, placing the letter on the table. He adjusted his glasses and read it slowly. When he finished, he nodded. "Your grandfather helped build half these cabins. Folks forget that. When the resorts came in, a new crowd took over. People who thought money meant ownership. But not all of us forgot." He leaned closer. "Tomorrow, the town council's holding a heritage meeting. You should come. There's still a few old-timers who remember what your family did here." I thanked him, feeling a strange mix of pride and fear. As I left the diner, I caught a glimpse of Karen's car parked across the street. She was inside, phone pressed to her ear, glaring at me through the glass. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't done. She was planning something. The next morning, the mountain felt different. The air was heavy, the sky bruised with clouds, and the pines whispered like they were holding their breath. I arrived at the town hall just before noon, the small wooden building packed with locals. I recognized a few faces from the diner, but most were strangers, including her. Cabin Karen sat in the front row, phone in hand, lips pursed like she was waiting for her moment to strike. As soon as I walked in, she stood. "That's him," she snapped. "He's been trespassing on land that doesn't belong to him. I checked every listing. There's no record of a sale, no transfer, nothing." Murmurs spread through the crowd. I could feel the tension like static in the air. I stepped forward slowly, my heartbeat loud in my ears. "With all due respect," I said, pulling the folded papers from my jacket. "This cabin wasn't bought. It was built by my grandfather, Edward Holloway." Karen crossed her arms. Anyone can forge a story. Before I could respond, the old man from the diner, his name was Walter, rose from his seat. "Karen, sit down." She turned, startled. "Excuse me?" Walter's voice carried weight, the kind that comes from living long enough to know truth from noise. "I was here when Eddie Holloway laid the first beam of that cabin. He helped half this town survive the harsh winters before there was even a road. You don't get to tell his grandson he doesn't belong." The room fell silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to pause. Karen blinked, clearly not expecting backup to turn against her. "But he's not listed on—" Another voice cut her off. An elderly woman in a plaid shawl. "That's because the Holloways never sold through agents. They built and passed down. You'd know that if you were from here." More murmurs, this time in my favor. Heads nodded. Someone clapped softly. Walter turned to me and said, "Son, your grandfather called this place Holloway Ridge. It's been yours long before titles and taxes tried to name it otherwise. You're what we call a generational owner." That phrase hit me like a thunderclap. Generational owner. Not just of property, but of legacy, history, and belonging. Karen's face reddened, her phone trembling in her hand. This isn't fair," she muttered, backing toward the door. Walter smiled faintly. "Fairness doesn't build cabins. Families do." As I looked around the room, at the nodding elders and the proud faces of those who remembered, I finally felt it, the mountain accepting me again. The land didn't need me to prove anything. It already knew who I was. Enjoying this dramatic Karen Diaries story? Hit that subscribe button to catch more real-life HOA and cabin drama stories. If you love the twist in this one, give it a like and drop a comment below telling me what you would have done if Cabin Karen told you that you didn't belong.